Thank you so much for joining us for GYOPO's inaugural mixed race program. We are thrilled to be featuring award-winning writer and sociologist Dr. Grace M. Cho and mixed race psychologist and educator Dr. Jennifer Noble. In today's program, Grace and Dr. Jenn will discuss Grace's book, Tastes Like War, Memoir, and the liminality of the mixed race experience. As many of you may already be familiar, Tastes Like War is a beautifully written piece of nonfiction using a sociological approach reflecting Grace's journey as a biracial Korean American alongside her mother's immigration and mental health experience, adapting to life in the United States. The development of this program at GYOPO has genuinely meant so much to me as a mixed biracial Korean American. When I first read Grace's work around Korean mixed race and related social policy created at the founding of the Republic of Korea, acceptance of myself as mixed within the Korean American community became so much easier to navigate. This helped with my confidence to become a part of the GYOPO community. It is so wonderful to share that the intention of today's conversation between Grace and Dr. Jenn is to champion the mixed race experience in the US and further inspire our mixed kin within our intergenerational GYOPO community. We are an entirely volunteer-run organization. If you would like to ever get involved, please join our mailing list and indicate if you would like to join a GYOPO community. Lastly, we would love to extend an invitation to you all to help us volunteer on our mixed race Korean video we are producing. Thank you to all of our GYOPO volunteers and leadership for realizing this exciting program. Thank you, NAVEL, for hosting us in this beautiful space, and especially to Grace and Dr. Jenn for the work that you do.
Thank you. So welcome, welcome everyone. I'm happy to see you all and I'm happy to be here. We're gonna have a discussion here about this book. If you have not read it, it really is amazing. I think you should make sure to get the book, make sure you read it. But I just wanted to say that we're hoping to go on a little bit of a journey. So I have a bunch of questions that we'll try to get through, but the journey is really around trying to go from talking about the mixed race experience to kind of weaving into mental health and everything else that comes along with it. So I encourage you to save your questions. We are gonna have time for Q&A so that we can further the discussion, and we'll just see where the conversation goes. So welcome, you wanna say anything?
Yes. Hi, thank you so much for being here. It's really a delight to be here in LA, and I met with some people from GYOPO last year when I was in LA, and it was such a warm and inviting community from what I could tell. So I think that the way we're gonna start is that I'm gonna read a little excerpt, but I'm going to assume that not 100% of the people in the room have read the book. So I'll give you maybe just a really brief synopsis of a couple of things that are important for context. And so the book is called Tastes Like War. I describe it as partly a food memoir and partly a sociological investigation into the social roots of my mother's schizophrenia. So I spent many years trying to understand what it was that caused her to develop the symptoms of what Western psychiatry calls schizophrenia in 1986 when I was 15. I was alone in that effort because when I spoke with the adults in my family, my father and my brother, they were in denial about it and basically accused me of lying about it. And so that was sort of this moment in my life when I was rejected by my family. And then later I went to the community mental health care center to speak with a counselor, and the counselor told me that there was nothing that they could do for my mother and turned me away. And so it was sort of, looking back as an adult, I identified that moment as the moment when I, sort of lit a fire under me to want to understand this in a larger context. Because I experienced that as a great injustice against my mother, because I saw her for the first time as someone that others saw as disposable. So In the prologue, I described that in my lifetime I've had these 3 mothers. The first mother was the mother of my childhood, before she showed any signs of schizophrenia, where she was like super charismatic and productive, very nurturing, and I really, really adored her and looked up to her. And then when I was 15, that was when the break came, and then she became this other mother, and I felt the loss of the first mother. So during my adolescence and my early adulthood, that my relationship with her was to try to navigate what it means to have a mother who had schizophrenia and how difficult it was to get any sort of treatment for her. But then a third mother emerged, and that was at the point when I started to cook for her, because her mental illness had become so severe that she essentially stopped doing anything for herself. And so once I stepped into this role of cooking for her, which actually I did very reluctantly at first because I had a lot of challenges doing so, and she rejected my cooking, told me it was a waste of time, sometimes refused to eat it. I lived, 3 hours away from her, so it wasn't easy to, just logistically, it was really difficult. But over the course of years of doing this third mother emerged, because she changed. And also my relationship to her profoundly changed. And my understanding of what it means to hear voices or to have schizophrenia changed. So I'm going to read a little bit of a passage that's sort of, it's situated at that moment when that transformation starts to take place. And this is from a chapter called Oki, and just to give you one more bit of context, Oki was the name of my mother's voices. She named them Oki because they originated from an oak tree in front of my childhood home. Although later I started to wonder if maybe Oki was actually the Korean name Oki, because one of my Korean friends said to me, that sounds a lot like the name Oki. And so then I started to think maybe these voices actually had an origin in a person in her life that she had lost or that she couldn't speak about. The process of becoming my mother's cook allowed me to let go of my fear long enough to ask her about her voices. And it was as if acknowledging Oki's place at the table changed something between us. I was preparing one of the last recipes in the Bon Appetit cookbook when she said, "How about next time you make me some sogogi soup?" Sogogi is a spicy beef and radish soup in a clear, aromatic broth, which she taught me to make by barking out the directions from 5 feet away. Use more sesame oil. Don't be ashamed to use it. Now put in garlic. More. Okay, that's enough. Like other Korean dishes she would teach me to cook, it was simple and flavorful and tasted of my childhood. It became part of my regular rotation of dishes and was the entree for other requests. You make me some 콩나물 each week. I always gotta have that, It was always after she had begun to eat, as her hunger was being sated and she was swimming in nostalgia, that I would periodically check in about her voices. Mom, do you still hear Oki? Yeah, but they're not really bothering me anymore.
Yeah, I love that excerpt because to me it just sets the picture for the whole book and this purpose of kind of discussing mental health and mental health treatment, especially as it relates to schizophrenia. Because what I hear in that excerpt is that something about food, cooking, joining together, it created some sorts of safety, vulnerability. It sounds like you would agree, and that honesty was allowed through this joining over food. So I just wonder, to me, I think there are so many cultures that food is a really important piece of the puzzle, but especially if we think about cross-cultural ways of expressing emotion, especially like Asian diaspora, a lot of emotion is expressed through food, meaning you don't get up and say, oh, I feel so sad and I feel lonely. you might show something, but then you can say instead, oh, my stomach hurts. I don't feel good. And then your parents are like, oh, I'm gonna make you soup. I'm gonna make you this. I'm gonna do that. And that's how they care for you, and that's also how you're expressing yourself. So to me, I heard some of that in there. I wonder if you think that kind of fit.
Yeah, so there's a scene that comes a couple pages before that, which was the first time I asked her about Oki. And it was also over a meal. And in that scene, she describes Oki, she begins to tear up and get really upset about Oki and says, I wish they would leave us alone. And so through the serial act of eating these meals with her, she starts to open up, and so it's like her relationship to Oki changes as well, and it is through, I think that the rituals around preparing the meal and the intimacy that develops around the meal, but as far as like the comfort, so in that section that I just read, it's the beginning of her asking for Korean food. Because I had, I mentioned I made the last recipe in a Bon Appetit International Cookbook. Because when I first started cooking for her, I just cooked whatever I wanted to cook. I cooked things that I thought she might enjoy trying because they were new or novel, or because I thought they were really delicious, because she never asked me for anything because she just didn't want to eat, So, but towards the end there, that was the first time she asked me for Korean food, when she asked for the sogogi soup. And after that, like once that door was open, she started to ask for more and more Korean food. And then eventually, in that scene, it was the food of my childhood. Then it starts to turn to the food of her childhood that I actually had never tasted before. And so she was teaching me to cook my grandmother's recipes in a way that, was kind of recovering this moment from the past that was safe and comforting for her, right? And also an insight for me into my family history. Because for so much of my mom's life that I remember, she couldn't talk about things because the past was too painful and it was too traumatic. But through the food, then she started to open up about things that I just had no clue about.
Open up to you, and sounds like open up to herself as well, like allow herself to go there through that. I think that was very powerful, especially how you explained that some of the recipes she didn't have written down and she had never made made herself, but she still taught you how to make them.
Right, she was going by memory of watching her grandmother cook, and she taught me how to cook those dishes just based on her memory from like 40 or 50 years earlier.
That's crazy. I mean, that's just wild. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit here. I kind of want to go, like I said, growing up mixed race and kind of talk about that. So one of the things that's very important for this particular experience is the history of mixed race people in Korea. So I wondered if you can give us some context about that.
Yeah, so I think that maybe another one of the passages that I had planned to read addresses that. I know that some people here probably are familiar with it because GYOPO has been talking about it with this group. But the history of transnational adoption from Korea to the West, but also more broadly because it is, Korean transnational adoption was sort of a template for other international adoption programs. That history is located in a South Korean government policy to try to rid the nation of biracial people. So in a nutshell. But I'll read a section that sort of explains all of that. And it's also another food scene.
If you like food, you should get this book.
Princeton, New Jersey, 2006. My mother and I are sitting in her apartment eating a meal of sam, grilled meat and rice wrapped in lettuce leaves. In between bites of food, she lets loose a secret about her beautiful dead sister. My sister had 2 children, boys. No, I didn't know. Where are they now? No one knows. They just disappeared. She puts the sam in her mouth and begins chewing. What do you mean they just disappeared? I wait as she chews and swallows, pushes more of the sam into her mouth, chews and swallows again until she has eaten the entire wrap in one continuous bite. You see, in Korea, children belong to their father, she says. as she assembles the next piece of song. No one knows what he did with them after she died. The thought enters my mind that they were given up for adoption and are living somewhere in America with names like Andrew and Christopher, or maybe in France, Andre and Christophe. I think about some of the adopted kids I knew growing up who were renamed Kathy, Cody, and Robert, their Korean names forgotten, replaced, their birthdays rewritten as the date of their adoption, their Korean families rendered dead through official documents, the children told to never again speak their names. At the time that I learned of my missing cousins, I had also recently researched the ways in which my own family history was implicated in the history of transnational adoption. Although it began as a rescue mission in 1954 to find American homes for Korean War orphans, it quickly turned into a substitute for social welfare and a government policy to rid the country of an unwanted population. South Korea's first president, Syngman Rhee, whose motto was "One race, one nation," publicly denounced the presence of Yankee wives and mixed-race children as a social crisis. He signed a presidential order for the placement of these children in transnational adoption as a solution to the GI baby problem. American propaganda depicted the poor, socially rejected biracial child as the most vulnerable of all creatures to the clutches of communism, and therefore, Americans would be exercising their patriotic duty by rescuing them. At the same time, Korean social workers launched aggressive campaigns to convince mothers working in the camp towns that Korea could offer nothing of value to their children, and the only rightful place for them was in their father's country. And indeed, the law was structured to make it so. Children born to Korean mothers and foreign fathers would not be allowed to attend public schools or register as South Korean citizens. Long before I was born, Rhee's policies had already determined the conditions of our exile. South Korea's adoption program and American campaigns to save Korean children from communism and the quote-unquote Asian disregard for human life had become so successful that by the 1960s, Korean social workers had to expand their recruitment efforts to other marginalized populations. Single mothers and poor families of pure Korean descent became the new targets. Instead of finding homes for needy children, adoption agencies began looking for children to place in homes, thus continuing the steady supply of Korean adoptees westward. One former Korean social worker spoke openly about this practice. "I misunderstood my job, and I thought I was supposed to make the birth mothers relinquish their children." In the minds of many Koreans, America became a mythical place where there was no poverty or racism, and anyone could make it big. In the words of one woman who gave her 2 Amerasian children up for adoption, "One time my older one came home with his trousers soaked and frozen with his own pee. Children bullied him by saying, 'You must have a big penis, let me see.' I talked to them for about a month and said, 'We have been waiting a long time for your father who has never come. If you stay here, you will face constant discrimination. However, in the US, there is no such thing.'"
No such thing indeed, right? I was not aware of, all of that history, and it was just shocking to me, especially because I am aware of, summer camps in the United States that are dedicated at transracial, adoptees who are Korean, and the attempt is during the summer camp to kind of give you your culture and, help you find community, et cetera, which I think is great. But to know that perhaps some of these children were a result of a social worker saying, no, we need more. I mean, that is really painful. I did want to address also Hines Ward, which is one more, I guess, famous story that I'm aware of. He's an NFL player. Don't ask me the football team because I don't know these things. I don't even know if he's currently still playing. Anyway, no, he's not. Thank you. But he is Korean and African American, but he is very vocal about his story of having lived in South Korea and not being accepted or kind of dealing with things, and then he and his mother moved to the United States. I didn't really have the context that maybe it's because his American father did not have, the power there to kind of make life more comfortable, essentially. So then he grew up in the United States. But what's interesting to me, and I would like to get your perspective on this, is that once he became a famous, well-known, NFL player, and, South Korea gets wind of this, they're like, ooh, come home, you're one of us, we'll celebrate you. And, so what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, stuff like that happens where, we have this whole population of Korean diasporic people who essentially were rejected from South Korean society. But then once you get to the point where you become, famous in any way or respectable or, have achieved something that's very prestigious, then the nation wants to welcome you back and say that you're one of theirs again. When, that was never the reality earlier in one's life. But, the Heinz Ward story is interesting because, when I mentioned that for biracial people, essentially there are no citizenship rights, a lot of that is because of the family registry system that's through the father's lineage, but there are also, ways in which it's just the race of the person that is discriminated against, like institutionally. So I'm thinking of the mandatory military service for men. But once they welcomed Heinz Ward back, that sort of like gave a push to revise that law. So a few years later, then that law changed so that they no longer require that you must be of pure blood to serve in the military there. And the thing about the military service, I'm sure a lot of you know, is that if you don't do it, it just forecloses all of these opportunities in the job market afterwards. So it sort of guarantees that if you are a man who doesn't do this military service, you basically have to live on the margins. Right.
I mean, and I think it's interesting that, at least for Heinz Ward's approach, he was very gracious and then made sure to slip in his own treatment and also raise awareness of other mixed-race Koreans still living in Korea. And he's kind of like, and also, I would like to change that. I would like you to treat all of these kids better that maybe won't go to the NFL. And I feel like it was very subtle the way he kind of raised awareness without burning bridges.
Right, and I think there's some change. It's very slow, but I think that biracial children in school in Korea still report a great deal of bullying and discrimination. So even in recent studies looking at that.
Right. Well, so let's kind of talk a little bit about your own experience. So what do you think the most difficult experience was for you growing up as a mixed-race Korean in Chehalis?
Yeah, so the town I grew up in, Chehalis, Washington, had almost no people of color or immigrants when my family arrived there, and it's just highly xenophobic and super conservative. So growing up, it was pretty much irrelevant that I was mixed race because I was only seen as Asian. And so as I started to become aware of that I was just marked as someone who didn't belong there, I think that I tried to cling to my father a little bit more because that was how I got legitimacy there. And it wasn't really something that I was that aware of as a child.
What do you mean by cling to your father more?
Oh, because if I was with him going anywhere in town, it was safe, because nobody gave us any trouble. He was a well-respected, man. He had been there, he'd grown up there. I think some of his other relatives before he was born had lived there. So he was very rooted in that community. And so nobody was going to give me trouble if I was with him. But he was a merchant marine, so he was gone for half the year. So whenever he was gone and I would go to these same places with my mother, it was entirely different treatment, So actually, should I read? I have another passage that touches on that a little bit. Pages about racist. Okay, so the first section is in 1978 when I was in the 2nd grade. It's recess, and I'm playing by myself on the log toys, holding onto a slide pole with one hand and walking around it in circles. A blonde girl from my class grabs the pole next to me and begins to copy me. I glance at her, nervous about what she'll say. The tension builds as we continue to quietly rotate around the poles. Finally, she breaks the silence. Are you Korean? I'm amazed by her question. How did you know? Instantly, I like her, the first child to not call me Chinese or Japanese. My parents hosted a family from Korea, and they also went to Seoul, she says. Decades later, I will marvel at the rarity of a small-town white American couple vacationing in 1970s South Korea. We exchange names. Hers is Jenny, and then go back to walking in parallel circles. We play together the next day at recess and again the next, and soon we begin seeing each other every day after school too. At her house we eat homemade finished cardamom pastries and wasa bread with cubes of cream cheese. At mine, my mother wakes up early from her daytime nap to set the big dining table with orange linen napkins that she sewed by hand, crystal plates, and tiny silver forks for our afternoon snack, which is usually fresh fruit. Strawberries and chunks of honeydew melon dipped in powdered sugar. Jenny becomes my dearest friend, my psychic armor for the onslaught ahead. The people in my family's immediate midst, school teachers, next-door neighbors, and my father's friends and relatives, were generally kind and well-meaning toward us. At the outer limits of Chehalis' 6 square miles were the Hicks, the rednecks, the shit kickers, as the kids in my high school called them, and as they sometimes called themselves too. They had a reputation for holding the same views as Uncle Sam on the Hamilton Farms billboard, but the divide between town and country was an open border, and so we lived among both people who tolerated immigrants and those who wanted us to go home. To survive my father's hometown, we sometimes had to make ourselves invisible. My mother tried to wring the foreignness out of her tongue by speaking only English, except for the names of Korean foods and things for which there was no translation, even at home with us, her Korean children. And so I became an outsider, not only to the place where I grew up, but also to the language of my birth country. I would always be excluded from the we of Urimal, our language, as Koreans call Korean. Decades later, after summers of studying Korean in windowless classrooms in Seoul and conforming the sound of my speech to the standard dialect, I still could not utter the words Urimal to Koreans without an interrogation. Where are you from? Why don't you speak Korean well? Are both your mother and father Korean? No, they would conclude, you are not Korean. 1980, 4th grade. I've just arrived at Jenny's house for one of our marathon playdates. Instead of her usual chatter and excitement at my arrival, she's quiet and avoids eye contact. What's the matter? I ask, and then her words spill out. My neighbors ask my mom who your real dad is. Her face turns red and she begins to cry. They don't believe that your dad is really your dad. My mom got so mad and told them it's not true, but they wouldn't believe her. I'm awash in emotion, feeling vulnerable but protected by Jenny's family. Her mother's anger a reflection of her sense of justice, possibly of her own identity as a Finnish immigrant's daughter. More than anything, I feel shocked. It's the first time I realize that my family is a scandal. The first time I'm able to see myself through the adult locals' eyes. How can they not see how much I look like my father? We have the same angular jawline, the same full cheeks, the same Cupid's bow dimple. My mother marvels at the similarities almost every time she looks at me. Yet the white people can't see it. All they see is the Korean in me, the Korean they call Chink and Jap. Who am I without my father to claim as my own? Now that my relationship to him has been called into question, I'm even more of a foreigner in this town, illegitimate to the core.
Yeah, I want to come back to this relationship with your father for sure, but I just had a follow-up to that segment. I just wondered, did you ever meet anyone else that was mixed race in your town growing up?
Yeah, so my family was the first, as far as I know, the first Korean family to come. And then a few other Koreans started to trickle in. And they were all mixed race in a sense. So either there were children who had a Korean mother and an American father, or they were Korean adoptees in white families. And so there were probably like 10 of them or so by the time I left that town when I graduated from high school. And then in addition, there was one black-white mixed-race family. So we had 2 biological kids and 1 adopted child.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever, I mean, I'm just thinking of my own experience, and I'm sure some of you may have had something similar where you're kind of living life, you're aware of your mixed-race kind of experience, but maybe it's not a big piece of how you see yourself every day. But I remember having a peer when I was in junior high, and we just sort of made friends randomly, and we all walked home from school. So one day I saw her go to her home, and I saw her 2 little brothers, and I was kind of like, hold on, And so one day I think either she asked me or I asked her, like, where's your mom from? Because it's sort of like we were talking to each other because we both knew we had a black parent. And then she was like, oh yeah, my mom is from Japan. And I was like, oh, my mom is from Sri Lanka. And then she was like, oh my gosh, do you eat rice? I was like, oh my God, I love rice every day. So we like had this whole moment of like, you have a similar experience in life. And it's not like we became best friends, but there was just something that tied us together where we could just do a head nod, or I was always kind of like protective of her in some way. And it sounds like maybe the kids you saw were older, or I mean, you were older and they might have been younger, but did you ever have that kind of experience?
Yeah, some of them were the same age as me. Yeah, and I wrote about one of them. So my mom actually took her mother under her wing, and so my mom sort of took on this role of making kimchi for every Korean person who arrived in the town after us.
Right.
And so the first one was another mixed race family. They didn't last long in that town because it was just so isolating that they ended up moving to Tacoma, where there was a much bigger Korean community. But yeah, and then the first group of adoptees came in, and my mom made kimchi for them. And they 2 of them actually recently wrote to me because they read the book about, and they told me how much it meant to them to see this story reflected and to be seen in that way, because even today their parents are sort of still in denial that it was a traumatic experience to be a transracial adoptee in this sort of environment.
And another example of food as a connector. So just to give like a little context for where this next question is going, a lot of the work that I do, I know I was introduced as a psychologist, and a lot of the work that I do is with parents of mixed race kids, but also just parents in general, parents of teenagers. I love working with kids and teenagers, and a lot of times the work that I have to do with parents is to kind of help them become aware of themselves, aware of their own identity in a lot of different aspects, but especially with parents of mixed race kids, it is a big task to have a parent become aware of not only their own racial identity, but just their understanding of how they've experienced the world based on their racial identity. And sometimes that's a struggle for parents, especially perhaps white Americans who don't often have to think about their race at all until maybe being asked to or forced to, right? So you kind of have this, there's another expert that you can talk about, but you had, it sounds like a very shocking experience to me with your own father about his views of race and his views of himself, so I wanted to have you talk about that.
Yeah, so when I went away to college and then started to become exposed to more ideas and started to make friends who were other people of color, it just completely shifted my perspective.
You were brainwashed by liberal education.
And there was one, I guess it was a summer, maybe it was a summer that I went to visit my parents. It was in 1992, and I found on my desk a letter, a thank you letter from the David Duke campaign on my father's desk. And I confronted him about it. I said, don't you know that David Duke is a white supremacist? And my dad was just completely, at first it just didn't even register that that was a problem. And he was totally confused, in particular, for why it was a problem for me. And I said, who do you think I am? I'm your Asian daughter. And he just sort of stuttered and he said, but you're not black. And so, which was very telling that there was just so much he didn't understand about his own position in the world and, the action of, supporting this person. And so we just had a huge falling out at that point because it became clear to me how far away he was from me in many ways, like he couldn't understand who I was, what my identity was, what it meant to be Asian. And, he was a lot older than my mom. He was born in 1919. So when you think about 1919, okay, so I know that he saw a KKK rally when he was a young child because there was a huge KKK rally in my hometown on fairgrounds, just like this giant spectacle. So all of these things were sort of normalized for him during his childhood too. And so there's just so much to unlearn and unpack that we never really recovered from that.
Do you think that he thought he was progressive by marrying your mother, or do you think that didn't register?
So yeah, progressive? I'm not sure.
That's a strong word.
I think he really genuinely believed that he rescued her from Korea.
Okay.
So I don't think it was so much about him being progressive as it was, feeling good about himself.
Yeah, a little bit of savior.
And also just because that also is a form of white supremacy,
Yes.
right? It's like of putting yourself in a morally superior position.
Right.
And that dynamic, even though I couldn't put words to it for many, many years, I now see that was so much of the dynamic between my parents.
I see. And then he was sort of locked in this, I guess what we would call black-white binary, where it's just like, it's either white or it's black. And so he, in his mind, sort of put you in the white category.
Yeah, so, the term that I used in the book was approximately white, right? Because he probably thought because I was Asian, which to him is not black, and because I was mixed with his genes, that I was approximately white. And, in sociology, I don't know if anybody here has studied sociology, but in the sociology of immigration, there's this term that is thrown around very uncritically, honorary white, right? And so they often talk about how Asians who are successful are honorary whites, without even thinking about how that framing of it is also supporting white supremacy, because it's an assumption that it is more of an honor to be white than it is to be Asian.
Yeah. That whole experience made me think a lot, and again, those of you that are mixed race in the room, maybe you've had similar experiences with your own parents where you realize how they either view their own race or their own racial group or you as their mixed race child. But I think one of the big sort of aspects that kind of cross all communities, and even you sort of touch on a little bit too, is anti-blackness. And I know for myself, I was just going to say that if you remember the movie Do the Right Thing, did anybody watch that? There's, it's kind of considered a classic, but there's an element in that film that deals with police brutality, and I don't want to give anything away, but lots of violence in this particular scene. And what was interesting is my mom and I watched that film together, and I don't know that was introduced, but my mom is from Sri Lanka and my father's African American. I don't know if I said that. So I'm watching this, movie with my mom, and so we're both into it, and there comes this really powerful scene where someone is wrongfully, essentially killed, right, in the film. And so I'm just like, oh my gosh, right? And my mom had a very different reaction. She felt like that made sense or it should have happened. And so we had this whole blowout. I was an adolescent as well. And so we had this whole blowout of I was like, how could you even think that that was okay? Didn't you see what happened? Didn't you see this? And I just remember having this moment of wait, if you're okay with that in the film, how do you see me? I am not sure you are registering who your daughter is, right in front of you living in the house. So it was really fascinating, but there was a journey that my mom has gone on, either through her own just listening to the news and watching things and reading things and talking with me, that now she has a totally, opposite view of police brutality and the just anti-blackness and the treatment of Black Americans in the world. So I just wonder, did you ever see any shift for your dad over time?
So I don't, we didn't really talk about race much after that. Okay. I just sort of avoided that.
Okay.
But he did tell me towards the end of his life that that something was happening to him in the way that he could see the world.
Oh.
And he started to consume more liberal media. And wanted to tell me about that. We didn't have a lot of in-depth conversations, and also I was only 27 when he died, so I didn't really get to see that relationship didn't have time to actually go on a similar journey.
But it is interesting that there was he is recognizing somewhat of a shift, even though he couldn't put a lot of words to it. Interesting. So let's kind of keep going. So you and I both have Asian immigrant moms, and I think there's lots of generalizations. Maybe some of you also have Asian immigrant moms in here. And especially for daughters, there's a lot of expectation and pressure of, getting the good grades and why did you get a B+, this is a failure, and, those kind of things. It was interesting that we both took piano lessons. There seemed to just be a lot of focus on development and academics, but what I noticed is that you also had dreams of cooking and food related stuff. I used to have dreams of dance. My mom put me in ballet, but she was like, don't ever think about doing it. What are you talking about? This is just something I'm sending you to, but don't be interested in it. So I just wonder, about this, because you had those dreams, I had these dreams, but here we are both with PhDs becoming the doctor that the immigrant mom said, be a doctor, a lawyer, maybe an accountant, these are your choices. So what do you think about this?
Well, now that I have spent 25 or so years trying to understand the conditions of my mother's life, I see it very differently than I did as a young person.
Okay.
Because I understand it to be about her wanting to erase all of the shameful things that had been, that she had been burdened with, other people's shame about who she was. That my education and achievement was sort of her redemption.
Right.
So that's essentially how I understand the pushing, even though I'm sure there are other parents who do that, and they don't come from a history of being a very low status person like my mom was. But I think that the ironic thing is that she told me, no, you can never be a cook when I was 5 years old. But then I ended up doing that anyway, and specifically cooking for her, learning how to cook, and that's something that actually gave me an even deeper understanding of her, as did my academic studies. So I don't think that she ever would have thought, get a PhD, become a scholar, and study all the things that I tried to escape in Korea. But that is what I did, and at the end of her life, we talked about that work that I was doing. And at first she was, she seemed a little shocked by it, but then she said she wanted me to go forward with it and publish that work. And I understood that to be her finally ready to let go of that shame. through this daughter that she, essentially created through all of her work, trying to get me to do all of these things that would lead me on this path. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because the first review of Tastes Like Work came out in Korea in a feminist journal, and the way they sort of framed it was that it was about education more than anything. It was about my mom being this woman who pushed her daughter to get a good education, so that I could then speak out against the forces that prevented my mom from getting an education. Wow. So it was such an interesting take on it.
Yeah. I guess it's not fully incorrect, but it's quite a different take. I think it's interesting, though, this idea of the expectation of the daughter, and what you're sort of saying is, in a way, whether you meant to or not, or like you said, there was that spark around 15 years old of like, okay, no one is seeing what I'm seeing, and I'm gonna figure this out later on. But there is some uplifting or healing that you are sort of doing for your mother through this academic work, and an honoring, I think, of her in a way. Well, I think it's a very thorough honoring, and it's one that you really delved really deeply into. And I think, if nothing else, you're still fulfilling this role of, the good daughter. But I think it's really a beautiful way of doing it. I don't know if you were aware of.
Yeah, I am aware.
Okay.
No, I definitely feel that now. I definitely feel
when
her.
you were doing it or afterwards.
No, more just since it's been done, and I've been,
okay.
I've had many opportunities to think about it. Well, I think as I was doing it, my intention was to honor her.
Okay.
But I think now I definitely feel like she's happy with me. She passed away, so she's that she thinks that I've done her proud.
Right. Right.
But it also, I'm not self-sacrificing in any way, having just done this for her, because I think it fulfills so much of my own desire to want answers, because I'm really curious. I like to interrogate things, systems, structures, and things of that nature. And it helps me to continue to feel like I am defying these power structures that, caused me to see her as a disposable person when I was 15.
Right. I found that so powerful. I mean, just being, like I said, I'm a psychologist that works with teenagers. I love that age group so much. And I think they're, adolescents are like really underestimated with how much they think and are aware of the world. And it was such a powerful thing to read that you at that age are seeking out help. Like, you're reading books and you're talking to people and you're like, tell me, what should I do? I am an adolescent. I'm going to go help my mom here. And no one was registering that. I think if people really look back and think about, wait, this is a kid that is coming to us, something must really be going on. Let's help, let's support. But they're like, that's what I felt they were doing.
No, that's what I felt too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I think that's something that really can't be overlooked. And I think shame is a big piece of this puzzle as well. So you mentioned this writing and the work that you did, or the way that you were pushed, and then some of this work is coming from your mom trying to perhaps resolve some shame she may have had about her own upbringing or her own history. I do think shame across the Asian diaspora is written about a lot. It's a really big thing that must be kind of respected, especially in the therapy room, if I think about it from my perspective. Especially South Asians, that's a population I am more familiar with, but they are very easily shamed, and you can lose a client real fast if you say something in such a way that makes it sound like you were at fault and you did wrong. But I just wonder, we're having this discussion, but what about your experience with shame? Did you feel any shame growing up as a mixed-race person? What were some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, again, I don't know that the shame was about being mixed race as much as it was about being Asian, where I grew up, because the mixed part got me closer to the white, the acceptability of whiteness where I grew up.
Okay.
And then you know, interestingly, I quickly shed that when I went to college, and where my worldview just changed. And now my relationship to shame around being mixed race is that I've done all this research, seeing how much the South Korean nation was ashamed of this population, that I understand that shame sort of created my life conditions. And it's not something that belongs to me, it's something that was external to me. But I carry the burden of it still, you know, through all, you know, the after effects of all of these things that have happened to my family.
Right, you're still impacted by that. Right. Well, let's come back to some of this growing up. I kind of want to go into the schizophrenia piece of it and kind of talk about treatment. So I guess we may need a little bit more history about, I know we're referencing you in adolescence seeing these early symptoms about your mom, but I wonder if you can give us a little bit more of the background of the journey that you saw happen with your mother developing schizophrenia.
Yeah, so it all happened around that time that I was 15. She had been a professional forager, and so she was really active and productive and had a business that she ran out of our house. And then I noticed that she stopped doing that. You know, it's sort of tapered off and then just completely stopped. And also she lost interest in food and cooking. You know, she was still doing it, but she used to be very passionate about that. And so that was the first sign for me that something was wrong. And then I noticed that she started to become very suspicious of people that we knew. And really some of the, you know, like the classic symptoms of paranoia. So-and-so's involved in a government conspiracy. Ronald Reagan is sending us messages through the telephone or through the microwave. Watching Wheel of Fortune and seeing hidden messages in it. Sometimes textbooks. Yeah. And so that I went to, at that point I went to my high school library to check out the books, you know, check out the DSM, the high school psychology textbook, and I diagnosed her myself, you know. And then, you know, as I mentioned, none of the adults believed me or would help me. And is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
right?
the journey.
Yeah. And the one thing that counselor said to me was, the only way she could get help is if she hurts someone. And so, then I asked him a question. I said, "You mean the police could make her get help?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I don't know if it would do that much." And so to me, that was sort of like my last-ditch effort, that I was going to try to escalate a fight that I had gotten into with her so that I could call the police. And I did not understand at that time that they were not actually going to take her to the hospital. They took her to jail. And so it was this huge fiasco, and she didn't forgive me for years. You know, it just undermined her trust in me. It was really heartbreaking for me because it was not at all what I thought was going to happen. And also the police officer said, you know, because I said, "Can't you just take her to the hospital?" And he just said, "Sorry, it doesn't work that way. And there's nothing we can do for your mom." And so again, you know, like this adult authority figure saying, "There's nothing we can do for your mom." And so then I just went away I just, you know, tried to figure out how to live with it, and I then went away to college. And then it wasn't until 1994 that she got treatment for the first time. But all treatment consisted of was the drugs, which actually made things worse. And it, you know, so she was sort of on and off meds, and they often made her feel worse. And it wasn't until 2002, so like another 8 years, that things started to get a little better. And so it coincided with this period when I was cooking for her.
I think that's, you know, again, I want you all to register that at 15, imagine a child trying to actually help and then getting faulted for, you know, trying to sort of, it's a very adolescent thing to do, like not really know how everything's gonna work and then think, okay, I got the solution, I'm gonna do it. And then like, wait, no, that wasn't supposed to happen. But that no one, to me, what I find amazing is that it just didn't raise any red flags for anyone around. And this is why people talk a lot about our police and how much they need more training, especially around mental health situations, because this type of treatment happens all the time and hasn't stopped, really. But, you know, what you go into after that is, again, that search for, like, what are the things that led to this for my mom? And I want us to talk a little bit about these risk factors, social risk factors. And, well, maybe I'll just have you start there. Like, what are some that you want to share now, and then we can kind of have a talk about it?
Yeah, so the research on the social risk factors, you know, it was non-existent at the time that I was an adolescent. So it's really only been like in the last, you know, decade, 15 years that there's been more emphasis on this. And some of them are things that you would expect, like, you know, childhood abuse. But then there are other things that maybe you wouldn't expect as much, like being a person of color in a white neighborhood. And that the whiter the neighborhood, the higher the risk. And I could count the number of people of color in this town of 5,000. I mean, I knew everybody. You know, and so if you look at my high school yearbook, you could count like maybe 5 or 6, 5 or 6 people.
Wow.
And another one of the risk factors is immigration. You know, and so that we have this idea that immigrants come here for opportunity, for a better life, but sometimes that pursuit ends up actually making one's life completely unravel.
Yeah. Right. It can be a very stressful experience for some groups to immigrate. So then, you talked about these treatments, and I just wonder, what are some of your thoughts about, you know, here you're seeing medication make things worse and it's not helping, and maybe, you know, mom found a therapist, but then she didn't continue going. So what do you wish could have happened as far as treatment is concerned, especially given all your research on what you find is useful, successful? Yeah.
I wish that I had known about and that it existed in the place where I grew up, the Hearing Voices Network, which is an entirely different model of thinking about the experience that that psychiatry calls schizophrenia. So they don't use that diagnostic language.
Okay.
They call it hearing voices or having extreme experiences. And it is a peer-to-peer support group that started in, I think it was Denmark, but it's like really popular in the UK, and it's starting to gain some traction in the US too, where voice hearers get together. They validate each other's experience of hearing the voices, and they don't say it's just pathological and we just need to make them go away with medication. So that people can talk about what that experience feels like, what it sounds like, and what it means to them. And so for some people, it's really distressing, but for other people, it's meaningful and sometimes helpful, right? The voices can be benign, the voices can be comforting, and that for people who are having a lot of distress around it, they teach each other ways of communicating with the voices. You know, so it's basically like giving them, interrelational skills with the voices to heal that relationship, and that over time, those voices no longer, are malicious towards them.
Right.
And so it's basically, taking it out of this whole disease model. Of saying that this experience is something that's pathological. And many people who have done this report great success. Either sometimes the voices, go away, or they're diminished, or they continue, but they live with them just fine. Where maybe they're disruptive in the sense that they have to sometimes listen to them when they're trying to focus on something else, but then it becomes like a focus problem, not like a serious mental health issue.
Right.
And I think that we can take lessons from other parts of the world where they don't necessarily immediately pathologize this experience. When we were talking earlier, I mentioned this book, The Man Who Could Move Clouds by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. And it's a memoir about her family. And she comes from, 2 generations of traditional healers. And her mother heard voices and also had these visual hallucinations. And at no point did anyone in the community think that was a problem. That was a gift for her. And she used it as a way to actually elevate her status in the community, to feel more empowered. And at some point the voices went away. And it was, she grieved that. Everyone in the family grieved the loss of the voices. Whereas Western psychiatry says, the only thing you can do with the voices is just try to get rid of them.
Yeah, get rid of it because it's wrong, it shouldn't be there. I think, that model is actually used in a lot of other disorders, if we're calling them that. And I think it is sort of contrary to maybe the Western way of thinking, where it's just, you fix the problem and you make it go away. You don't acknowledge it. You don't really accept anything. You just need to get rid of it because it's a problem. I think that's very useful for anxiety, for example. Instead of taking a medication to be less anxious or figuring out how can I stop being so anxious, it's like, let's embrace the fact that I have a lot of anxiety, And I think I do a lot of work with either adolescents or some of the adult clients that I have. They start off fighting this fact, like, oh, I'm just so anxious all the time, and I just want this, and I just want to be calm, and how do I do that? How do I do that? And I'm like, what if you don't? What if you don't do that? What if you embrace the fact that your anxiety is always there and stop fighting it? And then when you realize, okay, here's this anxious part of me, or maybe we can even name it, like, this is the anxious me. Now how can I work together so that I can get through my life? I think that, to me, is what you're talking about. But what's so sad about it for me is that those people who were, quote unquote, suffering themselves had to figure out how to come together, and it wasn't, my field saying, hey, here's something you could do. We are still on the page of, no, get rid of them, or no, reduce your anxiety. I think I'm a little bit maybe on the outskirts on some of that, of the embrace and it's okay thing, because a lot of clients are like, you mean, like, what do you mean it's okay to be anxious? I'm like, you are, right? Like, what are you gonna do about that? You wanna be a whole different person? That's impossible. So let's just work with who you are and embrace that. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, because it reduces the conflict of, I don't like this piece of myself. And I think, especially for schizophrenia, there's a lot of shame involved in that diagnosis, trying to live life with that title and that label. So to me, that it fights that on so many levels. You don't have to be ashamed.
Yeah, and there's so much shame in the family,
Right.
so even if the person who has the diagnosis doesn't necessarily feel ashamed, somebody else is going to be ashamed
Right.
of them because
Right.
of it. But since I have the opportunity to talk to you, who is a mental health, you're a mental health professional, I want to know, how do you think we can radically reimagine mental health care?
Yeah, I think it's I know we talked a little bit about it, and it's probably a question that I think could go on for a couple hours. I do feel one of the ways that we need to radically imagine it is looking to a global perspective. I mean, unfortunately, the US, or like the Western world, really is wanting to give diagnosis and treatment to the rest of the world. And I think that is a big problem, and we are missing out on so many opportunities where we can learn from other cultures and other countries how they deal with things, and how they've successfully dealt with things, whereas our country is like, no, we have the answer, we'll tell you what it is, do what we say, So a great book that I just wanted to reference for all of you is, it's called Crazy Like Us, and the subtitle is The Globalization of the American Psyche. And it's a really powerful book written by an anthropologist, where he focuses on one disorder and one country for each chapter. So it might be anorexia in Hong Kong, schizophrenia in Zanzibar, PTSD in Sri Lanka, and so on. And he really takes the opportunity to show that when Western, psychologists, et cetera, go to these countries with the answer, we often cause more problems, we don't get solutions, we create some, bigger thing that then they have to deal with, but that it doesn't go the other way. I think slowly, and if you search for it, you can find some of the other way where we're learning from other countries. To me, one of the biggest ways we can do that is through community healing. I strongly believe, I'm coming from a little bit of a perspective, I'm thinking of parenting right now, and let's think about like individualistic society or a westernized nation and raising children. A lot of times we expect either one parent or two parents to do everything all day, like cook, school, homework, cleaning, hobbies, everything. Whereas in a lot of other countries, they use the whole community around them, where it would be totally normal for a mom to be like, you know what, kid, we're kind of having a thing, you're getting on my nerves, go next door to your auntie's house. And the kid's like, okay. And the auntie next door is like, okay, you needed a break, I'm cool, like we're here. They'll play with their cousins. Here, first of all, we're not set up for that. And there is a little bit of shame around, oh, you couldn't handle it, you had to like send your kids somewhere to, you needed a break, what's wrong with you, or how come you couldn't get it together? But in other countries, it's like, it really is this idea of a village raising a child, and they all understand that role. I think you can see some of that in our minoritized communities in the United States, where, for example, let's say it's, I always give the example of like a church, like a predominantly, let's say, African-American church. A lot of times, all the people that go to that church start to view themselves as family members of all the kids. And so that means if one parent is kind of doing something somewhere else, anybody can go up to that kid and say, hey, sit down, stop doing whatever. And the kid's like, okay, and that will be fully expected, where it might be frowned upon. So if we can take that and infuse that more into our mental health care system, I think it could make such big differences. But we often send the one person to the one, mental health professional to be fixed, and no one else is involved. It's a really big problem in my view. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think that's one big way is, I think we think we're doing community sometimes, and we're really not. But what are your thoughts?
No, I agree. That sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just give you another example of this, because one of the most common places I see this happen is with kids and teens going to therapy, right? It is a very common thing for a parent to be like, you have issues, like something's going on with you, you need to go to therapy, so let's find you a therapist, my 10-year-old, my 13-year-old, my whatever. Now you've got your therapist, great, they're gonna help you, they're gonna fix you. And a lot of clinicians will work in that way, and the parents, drop them off, okay, see you in an hour, now little kid, blah, blah, blah. And maybe you can do some good work here, and the kids started to understand things, but then where do they go after 50 minutes? Back with those two people who didn't have any new thinking and are gonna do the same thing and cause the same, issues. So I've worked at a couple agencies where it's been required, and then in my own practice, I make it very clear that if you're gonna bring your kid to therapy, you will also be involved in parent work on sometimes a weekly basis, maybe it might be monthly, we'll see what you need, but there's no way that you're gonna drop off and pick up and expect progress. And any and every time that a parent is involved in their own, what we call parent work, it's not therapy for the parent, it's in conjunction, to support the kid, way more progress, way more awareness on the parent's part. And once the parent is shifted and changed and has some understanding, healing happens without them even realizing it. And the kid, they're like, oh, they don't do that anymore, and oh, this is better. I'm like, really, what do you think? What do you think that was for? And, oh, he must have, or they might. I'm like, okay, you can think about it that way, but to me, that's a really big piece of the puzzle. And I think we have another excerpt I'm curious to have you read about with the food. Oh, where? Oh, okay. Well, let's just talk a little bit about this piece of food. There are therapists that infuse food, eating into the therapy room, which one side of our world is kind of like, oh, that is just wrong. You don't eat during therapy. What are you just gonna have food in your mouth and talk about deep things, But the clinicians that do that, they find so much more depth there's, you know, a connection that can be reached, more things that are shared, because we are a people that, especially for communities of color, we're just, I don't know, generationally taught to share and connect over food. So I think that's another way that we can challenge.
Definitely. And I think during those last few years of my mom's life, I felt like it healed the relationship between the two of us, all of those meals that we had together. Yeah. And it healed something within me as well.
Yeah. So should we go to Q&A? Yeah, so let's open up the floor. Sorry, I might have gone over the time. I wasn't paying attention well enough. I don't know if there's another mic. Oh, there it is. Okay. So if you just raise your hands and you can ask some questions.
It's really interesting to see how different types of contexts are really informing these experiences you're talking about. And I was wondering if you feel like, and sorry that this is kind of like a left turn, if you feel like geopolitical history is kind of important to the context of mixed race.
I feel like you should take that.
If political history is important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that excerpt that I read, it's all about political history, because my mixed race identity now is entirely different than it was before I understood, you know, my mom's past, and before I had done any research on the Korean War or on the, you know, the policies around mixed race people in Korea. And so what it means to me to be mixed race is that I'm a product of US empire in Korea, which is all about the political history, right? And so, yeah, I don't know what it would be if it wasn't that, you know? I think that earlier in my life I was sort of searching for what that identity was, and now I found it. You know, I'm very secure in that identity as someone who, you know, thinks about it a lot and critiques this history of U.S. imperialism.
Right. And I think, you know, you disappeared. But I think even in the U.S. history, like if we think before the year 2000, before the year 1990, our census didn't allow us to check more than one box. So the pressure and how you would view yourself as a mixed race person there was not a lot of permission to view yourself that way, because literally census forms did not make that an opportunity. So once the year 2000 hit, which is, you know, government decision, it really did have a big impact on our own identities and how we could view ourselves in this country. So I certainly agree that, you know, political changes influence how we see ourselves, how we can present ourselves in the world, because now Census 2020, we keep seeing a humongous jump in those that are checking off more than one box or identifying themselves as, you know, mixed race, multiracial. So would that have happened if we didn't have that, you know, political change? We don't know, right?
Yes. Okay, so I can present. I have a question and some commentary that supports some of the things a lot of things you talked about. So, can you elaborate on how your mother was denied diagnosis and treatment? Was it because she was unwilling to go into a clinical setting?
So the person I spoke to did not explain any of that to me. So I left there totally confused, because he didn't say try to bring her in. So yeah, obviously, like, I can't set up the treatment for her. She would have to do that, but he didn't. You know, I thought that maybe he would tell me how I could try to get her to come in, when, you know, like things that I could say to her that might get her to think about it. But he said he asked me how old she was. I said 45, and he said, I'm sorry, it's too late now. Because in the 1980s, all of the research on schizophrenia had been based on men's experiences. For men, the onset of schizophrenia happens in the teens to early 20s typically. For women, it can happen up to age 25. That's called the first peak, primary peak. But then there's a secondary peak that happens around age 45, because it coincides with the drop in estrogen. But that research didn't exist at that time. So my guess is that he heard that she was 45, and assumed that maybe she had been living with it for 20 years. And the conventional thinking in psychiatry is that it is a degenerative brain disease, and the longer you go without treatment, the harder it is to treat, and so that after 20 years, there's nothing you can do. So that is just my guess based on the research I've done afterwards. So yeah, that was how she was denied treatment. But also, I think that within my family, that because no one would support me in thinking about it together, that was another kind of denial, because they just didn't want to believe that this was really happening.
Okay, so some commentary I have to support your experiences. As a nonprofit, and I try to get mental health assistance for limited English proficient LEP Koreans. I am fluent in Korean as well. It's really, really difficult. It's really, really difficult. There are lots of cultural stereotypes about, Koreans are strict, and there's a sense of shame. We don't want to go into clinical settings. It took me 5 months and pulling my network and going higher up to finally get Korean American bilingual mental health specialists to meet a family for older adults, Korean speaking, who all have mental health issues. I said, they're not going to go into your clinic.
Yeah.
They're not going to call you. They're low income. They have broken free phones. You need to come meet them in their place, at their home.
Yeah.
And that finally happened after 5 months. Okay, 5 months. And guess what? It made a world of difference. They spoke about their problems. There was diagnosis. They admitted to the domestic abuse, the really violent, life-threatening domestic abuse. So I agree with you that you need to meet people in their place, where they want to and how they want to engage. And I commend you at being an adolescent. I'm 53. And I speak English. I speak Korean. I grew up in LA. I have a lot of connections. It's nearly impossible. So you took on a massive task, and really, I feel thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Yeah, I'm really happy to hear that.
Hi. Oh, okay. This is on. Sorry, I'm a little nervous, but I wanted to ask a question about how, I'm Korean, born and raised in Korea, Korean national, but I feel somewhat Korean American after living here for about 2 years. And I wanted to ask about your insight about how immigrants are usually caught in this system where, on the one hand, you have the horrendous American systematic mental health system, which I feel like is more about containing rather than healing.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we also deal with how Korean culture, for example, stigmatizes getting help for mental health. So I was wondering if I could get some insight from both of you about that.
I don't know that I have anything insightful to say about the second part of the question, only because just in my own experience, I was completely isolated from a Korean American community, so this was just within my own family. Let me think on it a little bit.
So the second part of your question was essentially finding mental health care when you are either an immigrant or just a non-American. I think, number one, it is a humongous issue, but I will at least say, if I'm kind of trying to illuminate some of the work that's being done in the field of psychology, there is a big push to create more representation and more mental health care professionals that can be a part of and understand the communities that they're working with. Sometimes that can come through the graduate program, trying to teach, cultural humility and some of the maybe more generalized research of here's what you could expect if you have a Korean family that comes into your office, which, it's something, but it's often maybe not enough. But there is, I think, a really big growth of minoritized folks who speak more languages that are you know what, that's what I want to do, because either number one, they saw that it wasn't there for their family when they needed it, or they see other people who are a part of their community that are you know what, I don't see it, and I want to fill in that blank. So while it's still difficult, there are a lot more, and it just means a different type of digging to find the mental health practices and places that serve these populations. So I do think there is a resource list that might be provided at some point. But yes,
So sorry.
Yes.
So actually, my question was more about the stigma from the Korean or the immigrant families and communities about seeking help, so
Yeah.
that we never go to get help. I feel like it's similar in Hispanic communities as
Yes,
well.
across
But
the board.
I love that you mentioned psychologists or therapists from immigrant communities, because I think my first therapist was a Korean American therapist, which really did not go well for. And so I ended up having a Latino therapist instead. But yeah.
No, I think it's a great point. It doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be good fit just because. But to this extra piece of the puzzle that you brought, again, for example, under the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, there is a subgroup that is Asian American psychology, and you have a whole bunch of Asian American psychologists that are doing the research, that are doing the clinical work, and that are trying to remove or reduce stigma in their own community to make it more palatable, or just create the awareness of like, hey, this is a good thing, this can be useful for you, or let's just do it in a way that you'll be more open to doing. I will say, even though I was going to discuss a little bit of my concern with TikTok with you all, but social media and the TikToks of the world are also doing a good service in regards to your question, because you have for example, younger Korean Americans that are either getting on and saying, here's what happened to me when I went to therapy. I had this great experience. Or maybe they're putting their parents on blast, like, why won't you go? And what about this? And did you know about that? And really kind of opening this door and making it visible so that people can challenge it. So I think the more that happens, the younger generations are kind of making it more of a possibility for the older ones.
Finding out if your mother or professionals ever linked her schizophrenia to the culturalized syndrome called hwabyung, which is referred to as an anger syndrome, and it's actually in the DSM. I'm not a mental health professional at all, but I've read about it, and so many things stem from this buried anger. And it was actually, when you read about the definition of it, it is especially prevalent in lower class women. And that's what made me wonder if you had ever heard of it.
I mean, I think I've heard that term, but that never really came up either from my mom or from, any mental health professional. Yeah, I don't know. I think that we need to think about the phenomenon, though, because I've encountered so many people who say, my mom was Korean or is Korean, married an American, who was stationed in Korea, and then developed something that looks like schizophrenia. Like, it's happened over and over and over again. And so it could be buried anger, but anger that is created by these, these imperialistic and violent structures. So I think that I would want to sort of go deeper and ask where that anger, what the root of that anger, comes from externally.
Right. Because it's not an inborn anger. But just to kind of add something to this, what you're speaking of in the DSM are called culture-bound syndromes, and there's other terms for it, but it's basically a small little section in the DSM that kind of tries to reference disorders that are only seen within certain cultural groups. And there's a good amount of controversy around them because, again, we Americans are sort of putting your disorder in our book for us to recognize it when maybe in the community itself it may not be viewed as a disorder or it's treated totally differently. So just to give the context of like sometimes culture-bound syndromes, I kind of red flag it a little bit sometimes.
So I appreciate your story and everything you shared and resonated with so much of it. But one thing that I was wondering is if you have interrogated the presence of like fetishization in your parents' relationship. I think it's something I've realized in the last couple of years is such a generational trauma that's been in my family from my parents' marriage, and then something that I've experienced as a mixed woman. So,
Yeah, I certainly have thought about that quite a bit. I don't think I wrote about it a whole lot, other than in the context of, the South Korean government setting up a system of sanctioned prostitution for the U.S. military, right? And how all of the, I guess the imagery and assumptions about Asian women that get carried forward into the United States from that. And I think that affects relationships, interracial relationships that have no direct connection to that phenomenon. So I've thought about it in those terms mostly.
Hi. Thank you so much for the talk, and I really appreciated the clarification of your intention around not making this a self-sacrificing work. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about like your journey in coming to that intention, because I think a lot of second gen and a lot of folks in the process of the disentangling Hun that you've mentioned in the book, and I think not necessarily centering the caretaker's Han, but also disentangling from that and processing that while processing your own sort of journey. I was really curious about that note, and I was wondering if you could share about that journey.
I mean, I think so much of it was really about my own need to not feel completely suffocated by, all of these layers of emotion, grief, anger, And so I think the untangling of the Han was mine initially, and then I saw how it was tied to my mother's. And I think that so much of my own motivation has been to try to understand her for my own, like a sense of peace. I don't know if this is answering your question at all, actually. Yeah. And so I think what you started with the not self-sacrificing part, I'm trying to remember who it was. I want to say that maybe once when I was in grad school, I saw a therapist who just looked at me and thought that, oh, you're so codependent with your mother. But I had a totally different experience of it. I didn't see it as that. I saw it as my desire, my need pushing things forward. But that also I didn't necessarily think of my entanglement with her as something that was, pathological. Right? Yeah.
Well, it would be if you had an individualistic perspective and you were supposed to individuate by then and be your own person and separate from your family. So why are you still involved?
So I don't know I'm not sure if I answered it, but if you want to ask, if I didn't, feel free to ask a follow-up question. Yeah.
I also have a question, thank you so much for.
It's a little bit.
Thank you so much for this conversation, and I really resonated with a lot of the things that you said, Grace. Certainly in terms of thinking about also like the racial dynamics within the family, right? Oftentimes our history is typically foreign or American father, and then a Korean mother in terms of mixed race Korean history. And I certainly see that in my family as well in terms of this kind of explicit and implicit racism that some of my siblings, I think, hold a little bit more internally. Something that I've also, through my work and research, have kind of worked through in a way. So there's that element that I think makes mixed Korean identity so complex within the Korean diasporic community as well, but also I don't know if you can also speak to the kind of racism that your mother or you also may have experienced within the Korean community, the Korean American community, which I can certainly say, growing up, going to often church events, which is typically what the Korean American community is made up of, right? Because of the history of immigration that was tied to Christianity and religion as well. So I certainly saw that in terms of feeling going to church, yes, they accepted us that we can go to church, but I also felt that there was a division that was unsaid, right? It's implicit. So I don't know if you can speak to that.
Well, again, my mom was not part of a Korean American community, other than those few people who moved to our town after her, but who were like her because they were also, they were women who also married Americans. So I never had the chance to observe her in that kind of setting or to observe the dynamic. But I've definitely felt it from within my family. For example, I have a cousin in Korea who, the last time I saw him, said I should stop coming back to visit because, I have to observe bloodlines. And that I had a family here that I was supposed to be, that should be the family that I'm trying to connect with, not them. And so I definitely felt that also as a rejection of my mom. And then Dr. Jenn actually had a question, I think, that we didn't get to about college.
Yeah.
So, and when I looked at that, I had this memory come back of when I first arrived at college. I was really excited to meet other Korean American students. And so I went to the Korean Student Association and found out that they were all religious. So, right away I thought, okay, I don't know about this group. But they also, treated me as if I didn't belong there.
Wow.
And one of them said, "Oh, you wanna be here, but you're half." And then she said, "Well, it's okay, you can." But and I think between that and just knowing that they all went to church and that it was not my thing, that I thought I don't want to be a part of this group, And so I've had a number of experiences like that sort of have conditioned me to feel like I don't want to ever be a part of the exclusive group, because and has really pushed me towards valuing inclusion and seeing those exclusive groups as just very violent psychologically.
Yeah, that's deep. I don't know who's. Oh.
That was the last one.
Oh, it was.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, we have
At 8.
so.
Look at you.
Okay, great. All right, Dr. Jenn. You call a shot.
Oh, and there was one.
Well, hopefully this will be quick, but or maybe not. I mean, I kind of wanted to, not to put you on the spot, Dr. Jenn, but I think I really wanted to take the opportunity of there being folks who are mixed or quote unquote mixed race Asian, but the history of whiteness in the U.S. and the history of blackness in the U.S. are so different, right? And the sort of experience of white folks, seeing you, Grace, and immediately being like, well, you're not white, right? Whereas in so many different ways, because of this whole history of how blackness developed in the U.S., blackness in a variety of different ways has always kind of been quote unquote mixed race, you know what I mean?
so I was, there are actually black folks who, well, anyway, so I was wondering if you could reflect on that a little bit? Me? Or, I mean, both of you can, or one or the other. Yeah, okay. I mean, certainly what I think you're just saying is that at least blackness in America, there is a really high chance that there is some mixed ancestry there. I'm not sure what angle you want me to take with the reflection, but I certainly recognize that truth. I think I try to kind of speak to that a lot. I just think it's a result of the unique history of this country that we have made it so that, if you have one drop of, technically used to be any other blood, but especially if you had any drop of, African ancestry, that is what you are. Everything else is erased. You got to identify that way. You had to check that off on boxes. You had to live that way in the world unless you were going to do some really hard work internally and externally to try to pass in a white society. So that's certainly still present, and unfortunately, I think there's a whole bunch of uneducated arguments on social media about how people should identify and who's really black and who's not, but I do think there is still a really strong expectation and push to identify black only if you have that heritage and kind of one drop yourself. And I do think perhaps mixed race people with black parentage can face a lot of uphill battles when they try to assert otherwise. So I think those are a little bit of my reflections on that, but at least for my stance, I try to resist that. I try to empower other people to resist that, because it was a problem then with the one-drop situation, and it's a problem now, and it all served to support white supremacy anyway, so if we really are fighting this larger problem, we shouldn't be battling over that. So I think now we have to get out.
I just wanted to share really quick one mental health resource. It's just a group that's located in multiple cities called the Yellow Chair Collective. If you're looking for a therapy that is culturally competent, highly recommended. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming, everyone.